I'm pleased to say that I'm going to introduce our last speaker for the day. We took note of some of the feedback from last year's and the last couple of years' symposiums, that we wanted talks at the end of the day that were lively and not full of numbers. So I'm delighted to introduce Shara Evans, who will be, Shara is a technologist, futurist, and keynote speaker. She's recognized as one of the world's top female futurists, fusing her engineering background with an intuitive understanding of how society is likely to respond to new technology. She's also the founder and CEO of Market Clarity, an award-winning technology analyst firm, and a regular media commentator on technology issues. Shara helps her clients understand new product and service opportunities, as well as threats that are being underpinned by emerging technologies. Shara is passionate about helping organizations think outside the box of what's available today to imagine the world in 5 or 10 years' time. So we want to start thinking of how we imagine our world in that time and commercialize these concepts into innovative new products and services. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Shara.
Good afternoon, ladies. Hey, it's great to be here. As a technology futurist, I'm normally presenting to a predominantly male audience, and it's just such a great pleasure to be presenting to a room full of women. I'm going to take you on a ride into the future today. We're going to be talking about the larger range of healthcare, but I'm also going to be drilling down into some of the things that are important to you in your day-to-day jobs as radiographers and interested in the whole area of radiology and where humanity is going into the future. So strap in. We're going to have some fun this afternoon. I'd like to start with a technology that you may or may not be familiar with, augmented reality. Have any of you played around with it? Augmented reality is where you can superimpose a digital image on top of the real world. Anyone have played with it? Yes, you can use it on your smartphones, but you can also have glasses that literally look like real reading specs, maybe a little bit thicker, but it looks like you've got a monitor image sort of floating wherever you happen to look. One of the really interesting technologies that I've played with is an augmented reality anatomy model that was designed by Case Western Reserve University, and I played with it a few years ago back at the Consumer Electronics Show, and it allowed multiple people to play around at the same time with human anatomy. So literally, we could take a look at a human body, peel off the layer of skin to see what was under a particular area, stretch it out, drill down, look at the bones, look at the blood vessels, look at everything underneath. So if you can imagine that you're in a situation where you've got an illness, whether it be breast-related or anything else, and you're having a conversation with your doctor or your specialist, and they're popping up an image of you and explaining to you exactly what's going on in your body and what they need to do with an operation, and peeling away layers or showing you exactly what they're going to do. Can you imagine what an amazing tool that would be in helping to communicate some very complex information to people that are, first of all, distressed, but also need to get a better understanding of what it is their doctor is talking about. There are also tools that are being developed, like this table that I'll show you a film clip of called Anatomage, that are helping with training of all kinds of physicians and nurses. So let me just roll this for you. Can we have some audio?
The Anatomage table is an interactive display system for anatomy education. It is capable of providing full-body anatomy visualizations at a life-size scale.
So this is a type of augmented reality.
So this is a skeleton of a real patient. They took all the tissue off. So I cut across here. If I press there, I get rid of it. Then I can turn the skeleton, and I can see the blood vessels.
So this is for training, but imagine if you had a tool like this that you can use with patients.
Structures can be toggled by tapping the on and off icon next to the desired structure, category, or system.
This is a commercial product. This is not a trial. and it comes preloaded with a whole range of different databases of humans and animal models. You can see all kinds of
There
vasculature.
are ways you can dissect animals in here. There are all different kinds of disease states you can put in here. Teach medical students how to evaluate the lungs for cystic fibrosis or pulmonary fibrosis or tumors.
It also simulates an operation table, as if you were in front of the patient or cadaver. The touch interactive controls are natural and intuitive, again strengthening the concept of being present with a full-body life-size patient or cadaver. The table comes loaded with a full-body CT scan enhanced with custom anatomical models. What you see here is the skin model. The scalpel tool can be used to create custom cutting planes, and then it can be rotated to see the volume rendering underneath with the digital models.
It's also compatible with CT scans, X-rays, MRIs, PACS systems, and a number of other things. The base cost is about US $70,000, so it's not cheap, but when you're talking about a learning tool, it's actually really very, very effective. There are other types of augmented reality that are extremely accessible and at a much lower cost price. This is an image from a company called Evina, and they have augmented reality glasses that use multispectral light to literally give you X-ray vision into the vasculature of a patient. So all of us at one point or another have probably had a blood test done where they've missed and it hurts like heck, right? Well, if whoever was doing the test or putting in the IV was wearing these glasses, they'd be able to see exactly where they should be putting the needle in. It's a tremendous tool, and it's actually very cost effective. And again, this has been commercial for several years already. This is not brand new, but it's again using augmented reality. Virtual reality is a cousin to AR, but in a virtual world, you are completely immersed in a digital universe. And you're typically wearing a fairly big, clunky headset, and you wouldn't want to be on this stage walking around with a VR headset on because you'd probably fall off and kill yourself or break something. But it has some incredible medical uses. There's a project in Brazil called the Walk Again Project, and it uses a combination of virtual reality, robotic exoskeletons, and brain-machine interfaces to help people who have been paralyzed from the waist down regain feeling in their lower body. And it's an experiment that's been going on for several years. They've had 8 patients in the initial study. All of them were paraplegics with no feeling below their waist, but still had some connected nerves along their spinal cord so that there was a chance of actually reactivating things. And what they did was 3-step. First, they had the patient use virtual reality with a brain-machine interface to measure their activity, controlling characters in virtual reality. And what they found was that it was starting to regenerate some of the brain patterns of moving motion. Then they put the patients, again with these skull caps with electrodes, on a treadmill, but in an exoskeleton, and with a brain-machine interface, we're using that to let the exoskeleton help them walk on a treadmill, assisted. And again, that started to fire up muscle memory and brain patterns. Then they combined the two techniques together, wearing the virtual reality headset, the exoskeleton, the brain-machine interface, on the treadmill, and started to be able to walk again on the treadmill. After about a year of doing this, what happened with all 8 of these patients is that they started to regain feeling in their lower bodies. They regained control of their bladders and bowels. One woman even decided to have a baby afterwards. Pretty extraordinary, isn't it? Another cutting-edge technology are little sensors, this one from a company called Proteus, that are being embedded in all kinds of pharmaceutical pills. So what happens is the sensor, in this case embedded in a pill called Abilify from a company called Otsuka, which it's actually an antipsychotic drug. it goes into your system, and you're wearing a little patch on your arm or on your chest, and it has Bluetooth communication between the sensor in the pill, and it gets activated by the digestive juices in your body, and it allows you to track exactly when and how much of a pill any given patient has taken. And as you would probably appreciate, it's very easy, even if you don't have any kind of cognitive disorders, to forget whether or not you've taken your medication or taken it at the right time. So by having this little tiny sensor, like literally the size of a head of a pin, embedded in pills, going to the patch on your arm, and then from there transmitting to a smartphone, and with permission perhaps to a carer or a doctor, you can then start to really quantify whether a patient is taking medication as prescribed, whether they're skipping doses, whether they're taking the wrong doses, and whether the medicine is actually effective or it's patient usage that's the issue. Otsuka was the first company to actually get FDA approval in the US for a pill with this embedded sensor, but I can see this becoming extremely mainstream in the years to come with all kinds of different medications. Another amazing technology that you heard a little bit about earlier is 3D printing. And in the medical world, we're now 3D printing everything from stem cells to bionic ears that give people better hearing than they would have had with their natural ear, to cartilage and blood vessels, all the way down to taking MRI scans and generating, for instance, a plastic replica of someone who's had their head smashed in a car accident and needs their jaw fixed, so that when they 3D print a replacement titanium jaw, it fits the model of the patient as they are, and they test it before they get into the operating theater, make sure that the fit is correct on the model that was taken from the MRI scans or other scans, and that it's all perfect before you open the patient up, and you're using titanium as the 3D printed model for the replacement jaw that fits the person's anatomy 100% precisely, even post-accident. What's even more exciting is this whole idea of bioprinting living tissue. So if you can imagine, one of the biggest problems that we have right now as a society is when we have organs that are failing, we need to go on a donor list, sometimes for 5 years, 10 years, maybe never. Well, there have been some amazing breakthroughs in this whole area of bioprinting. This scientist in Israel, the audio will start in a few moments, has 3D printed a living miniature human heart that has pumping blood vessels. It's about the size of a heart that you would fit into a rabbit.
The whole cellular heart with blood vessel is printed. And another major breakthrough is that it is printed from the materials of the patient itself.
So that means no immunosuppression drugs required, no rejection issues. And it takes about 3 or 4 hours to 3D print it, and then about another month to grow the heart to the appropriate size. It's still in very early days, but they're looking to do animal testing in about 1 to 2 years, and they're imagining that within 10 years it's going to be commonplace to see organ printers in hospitals where literally, if you need a new heart, you will use your stem cells from your excess fat, spin them out, and grow a heart based out of your own body's materials, and use that as the replacement organ, and you will not need to be on a waiting list for 10 years, and you won't be taking these immunosuppressant drugs for the rest of your life. How cool would that be? It gets even more interesting. All the way back in 2013, a scientist at Glasgow University in Scotland invented a 3D printer that was capable of printing drugs at an organic molecular level. So literally 3D printing drugs based on an exact formula that might be specific to your body. The thing that's holding it back is not the technology. I actually think it's the commercial model. Because if you think about it from the drug company perspective, they spend millions and maybe even up to $1 billion in developing a drug. And if they send that as a CAD file to a 3D printer in a pharmacy somewhere, how do they know that they're actually going to get paid every time a prescription is filled? But you start to think about the possibilities of drugs that are printed with your exact genetic makeup in mind, your exact body weight and your exact illnesses. Then you can start to think about the power of what 3D printing in the pharmaceutical industry just might do. But boy, will it be hugely disruptive. There's also a wide range of innovations and tools that surgeons and other healthcare practitioners are developing. This is called iKnife. It's actually a cancer snipping knife. I don't know if any of you have been in theater where you've seen heated surgical instruments and smoke comes out of it. In the early days, when people were operating on cancer, they were afraid that some of the smoke might be contagious and that cancer might even be contagious that way. Well, it turns out that that apparently is not the case. But if you use spectral analysis of the smoke, then you can detect which parts of the bits that you're cutting have cancer or don't have cancer. So you're using a combination of sniffing the vapor and artificial intelligence to determine whether where you've cut still has cancer or doesn't have cancer, so that you don't cut out too little or too much. I first heard about this back in 2013, and the trials kept going on. As of August last year, this is being used in a live clinical trial at the Imperial College in London. And, there's a fairly long evaluation period that will go on. But one of the areas that they are looking at is breast cancer surgery to make sure that they're actually cutting out all of the areas that have cancerous growth, but not taking out too much. So it's going to be a fairly long trial, and then it will obviously have to go to other institutions and be tested to make sure that it goes from one to another. But what an incredible tool. Really neat stuff. Another incredible technology that's actually what I would call forbidden technology or suppressed technology is bioelectromagnetic feedback devices, or pulsed electromagnetic frequency devices. And the way that they work is they have a very small magnetic current that is able to go through a patient's body and literally reverse the effects of many diseases, including inflammation. It's very, very effective with inflammation. I've read at least 50 peer-reviewed scientific studies or abstracts in everything from bone fractures to prostate enlargement. In fact, there was one study that I read in a prostate journal that was talking about a clinical trial from 2014 with dogs that had enlarged prostates, which is also a condition that a lot of human men have. And they used a bioelectromagnetic device for about 3 weeks, several times a day, on dogs that were owned by real people. And the owners just basically waved the device for about 10 minutes a few times a day near the dog's prostate. And within 3 weeks, there was a 57% on average reduction of prostate size for these animals. This device here is a gadget that I bought for myself because I used to have an inflammatory disease that was painful. And I had been using that for 2.5 weeks when literally I was able to stop all pain medication. 0, not even aspirin. And after about a year of using it, the, quote, incurable condition that I had is almost 100% cured. This literally goes all the way down at the cellular level and repairs tissue. It's an incredible innovation, and there are a lot of companies that are involved in designing these types of bioelectromagnetic devices. I chose this one because it has a nanosecond rise time, really, really fast. And there was a NASA study that was done that showed that a nanosecond rise time was 4 times more effective than a shorter rise time or a longer rise time. So again, something that might help some of your patients with pain management. You heard a lot about artificial intelligence today, especially from Helen. Her speech was great setup for me. So when I talk about AI, I'm using it as an umbrella term. It encompasses machine learning, it encompasses deep learning, natural language processing and voice interfaces and image recognition and facial recognition and emotion detection and chatbots and smart robots and driverless cars and a whole lot more. But there are so many amazing uses in the world of medicine. One of the areas where I think AI is going to have an impact on a lot of the work that you do is really acting as an assistant to a physician. So I do not see AI as replacing physicians, but I see it as a really valuable tool in a lot of different areas. So here's an example that comes out of UK. This is a chatbot called Babylon, and it's being funded by the National Health Service in the UK. And what Babylon does is it has a natural language interface. You can actually talk to it, and it does medical grade first level triage for patients. And part of the problem that they have, just like many countries around the world, is that there are long waiting times to get to see a doctor. So if you choose to use Babylon, it will start to drill down and ask you questions. You might say, oh, I'm not feeling so good, and we'll ask you, well, what's wrong? Oh, my tummy hurts, and then keep drilling down more and more into specifics. And then depending on what you say, either point you to go to a doctor or a hospital, or maybe go to your local chemist and pick up some aspirin. And the accuracy rate is getting better and better. It's not replacing a doctor, but it's actually helping to reduce the wait time for people who have symptoms so that they're not queued up and waiting for 2 weeks while they're not feeling so good. One of the issues, however, is that with these AI models, they're all training on data sets using a technique called deep learning. And you need really, really good data sets to be able to train the AI. If your data set has flaws, then the AI will have flaws. When they first rolled this out in Rwanda, there was an issue in that they weren't taking into account local epidemiology, mainly malaria. So it wasn't asking people the right questions about malaria. That's since been corrected, but it really highlights the need for humans to be in the loop as part of this whole AI training process. Another example of where AI can be used by a GP is this particular app from a company called VisualGX. It's called DermEffects, and it allows you to use your iPhone and take a picture of a skin condition, whether it be a rash or a lesion, and it matches it against a huge database of dermatological conditions, and it helps a GP to understand whether it's something like poison ivy or whether it's maybe a precancerous lesion, because a GP is not trained on the specificity of, all kinds of different skin conditions the same way a dermatologist would be. And you need to understand which way you might want to point a patient in the first instance. And it is a subscription model, and the company's looking at rolling out a consumer version of this. But again, I see this as a great tool for physicians. IBM Watson has been involved in the healthcare space for a long time, particularly in oncology, and they've teamed up with Memorial Sloan Kettering in the US, and they're helping pathologists to interpret oncology test results and decide what the best course of action is for a patient. One of the things that AI is really great at doing is understanding massive, massive data sets and condensing them. So in the world of oncology, there are always new clinical trials going on. There are always new medical journals being published. There are always new conferences. And the case histories of patients are huge. They can be 50 pages or more long. And you take the two and you match them together. You can have the AI doing predictive analysis, but then you have the human specialist look at what's coming out from the AI and making a human judgment about, does that make sense or does that not make sense? So I see the two working hand in hand together. We're also going to see a lot of AI in fighting cancer, and in particular in diagnosing imaging. Helen did a great talk just a few minutes ago about some of the developments that are happening with breast cancer, but one of the biggest issues that people have is that you've got this whole range of 2D images that you have to interpret. And one of the things that AI can do a lot better than humans can is take massive data sets and be able to crunch through them and pick out anomalies. That's not to say it's going to replace a human, but it's an assistive tool that if the human misses something, maybe then the AI will pick it up. And I agree with what Helen was showing her results, in that the AIs are getting better and better because the data sets that they're training with are getting more and more precise. And one of the things that happened, Helen mentioned 2015 as a pivotal year. That was the year that we started to see the mass introduction of graphic processing units in conjunction with deep learning. And that just started to take things up a huge ramp in the ability of AI to be able to detect things that the human eye cannot. And it's not just breast cancer. There are a lot of companies, including Google, that are using AI to look at things like lung cancer as well. And one of the things that Google is doing is taking these two-dimensional CT scans and having their AI build them into three-dimensional models by taking all these 2D images together, and then being able to determine whether or not there's a lung cancer by looking at the 3D model rather than just all these separate 2D images, and getting a better result than humans looking at the 2D images separately. But what's more interesting is that if you have the past history of older CTs, then the AI can also do a four-dimensional scan looking at how something has changed over the course of time for an individual. And that then gives you a much better picture whether something has changed. Another way that AI is being used, in particular with lung disease, is to detect pneumonia by using just simple coloring to show radiologists areas that look like they're impacted by pneumonia in somebody's lungs. So, will AI take the place of radiologist? I don't think so. I actually see it as a tool like an X-ray or a CT scan or an MRI. Those tools didn't remove jobs. They might change the way that your jobs were performed, but it's a tool that you use, and you still need some human judgment. Maybe someday, often a little bit in the future, AIs might be smart enough to do it on their own, but that's not on the very near-term horizon. Another amazing use of AI is to discover new drugs. So if you think about the number of drug molecules, there are a lot of them. But if you think about the wide universe of molecules that might be drug-like, there are 10 to the 60th power potential molecules that could be candidates for new pharmacology drugs. And 10 to the 60th, imagine 10 with 60 zeros after that. That's more than the number of atoms in our entire solar system. That's a big, big number. So once again, if you use AI to look at the properties of molecules and proteins that have produced effective drugs and scan these huge databases of potential candidates, you can start to use its fast crunching power to potentially detect new types of drugs and innovate on a baseline that would take years and years and years of clinical research. So once again, a tool that does not replace humans, but helps people to do their job in ways that they couldn't do without it because of the sheer volume of data. Another AI that's being developed right now at Stanford University is called Decagon. And it's designed to deal with the side effects of taking multiple drugs, polypharmacy. So as you would know, if you're taking one drug, you know that there's a certain number of side effects. But if you take 2 drugs, then the number of side effects starts to multiply. If you're taking 5 drugs, then it becomes extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, to know every single possible side effect. In fact, it's been said that there are about 1,000 possible side effects for any given drug. There are about 5,000 different drugs on the market. You multiply all the combinations together and you're in the billions of possible combinations. One of the early trials that they did with Decagon was still using only 2 drugs, and what they found by putting the material or information about Norvasc and Lipitor into this model is that it picked up a side effect that had not been previously noted, which was muscle inflammation. So it's still in its early days, but if you can imagine having your doctors with access to a model like this and inputting all the different medications that you're either taking or might be proposed for you, you can then start to think about what kinds of side effects all those medications might have together. And when you input it with your personal genetic profile or other lifestyle factors, it becomes much more precise medical care for an individual. AI also is a part of robotics, and guess what? We're starting to see robots appear in hospitals, in lots of places, not just the operating rooms. These pictures are from Queensland Health, and on the far side, there's Tessa, who is being trialed right now in a couple of hospitals in Brisbane. And it's based on a robot called Cruiser. And this robot is sort of cute, anime. It greets people. It does social interactivity, particularly for children. It'll tell jokes. It'll give hugs. And they're evaluating its effectiveness. Last year, they had another robot called Pepper that was being evaluated up in the Townsville area with great success. And there are a lot of what I would call companion or humanoid type of robots that we're starting to see deployed not just in hospital settings, but in hotels, in retail stores, and in a lot of other places. And we're going to see more and more of these roll out. One that I'm particularly interested in has been under development from Toyota for quite a number of years. So you think of Toyota and you think of cars, but they also have what they call a human support robot. And I took this picture from their website about a month ago, and it has all kinds of cameras, both in its one arm and on its, quote, faceplate, and it's able to do image detection. So it can recognize all the stuff that you've got around the room. And let's say you've dropped a piece of paper. On its arm, it has grippers as well as a suction cup. So it can even pick up things like a piece of paper just through a suction cup or pick up a pair of glasses. But what I like most about it is that on its faceplate, it's actually a video conferencing system, and it has microphones. And it's being designed so that elderly patients in particular can remain in their home environment longer, and that this is an assistive assistive tool where you can either look in on people or have healthcare providers watch them, or even in an elderly home situation. So imagine if you had an elderly relative in a health, care situation, and they're the other side of the world. I'm actually in that situation with my dad, and I had a robot like this looking after him. I'd be able to do a video conference, and he'd see my face on that robot, and we'd have a chat every day. And it would be like I'm by his bedside, even though I'm out here in Sydney and he's in America. Something like that can be a life changer for someone who's in a situation where they're really not very mobile anymore. There are also medical robots. You heard earlier today about how Da Vinci is being used as a trial for some breast surgery. Da Vinci has been rolled out in a number of places. Here in Sydney, RPA has invested in Da Vinci and facilities to train up to 400 surgeons a year, primarily for prostate surgery. So the cancer surgery is still very new. But what they have found with prostate surgery is very similar to what I heard this morning, is that the surgery technique with using a robot leaves less scarring and also is less painful, quicker recovery time, meaning less hospital bed use time, but there is an extra cost involved. And a lot of times that is an out-of-pocket cost that the patient will have to bear. Now, this is just one example of a surgical robot, and we're bound to see more and more of them as time goes on. But it's going to get even more interesting as we go into the future. This is still very experimental from MIT, still in early clinical trials, where they have designed little origami-type robots that are inside of a pill that's an ice capsule. And it's being designed to help where people have swallowed button batteries. Don't ask me why, but people seem to do it. And these button batteries get lodged in people's esophagus or in their stomach, and then once they're stuck there, they cause really serious inflammations, and it's a big problem. So what this origami robot does is it's encapsulated in ice. So as you swallow it, the ice dissolves, and then the surgeons use magnets to govern where the robot needs to stop, so they get it to stop near wherever the button battery is, and then it unfurls and it plucks out the button battery from wherever it's stuck, and it injects an anti-inflammatory drug, and then everything goes whoosh out through your digestive system. Now, what kind of surgery would you prefer? An ice capsule or getting your stomach cut open? I think the answer is pretty clear. I think the ice capsule would be my choice. Here's another innovation from MIT. Again, this is really experimental, and it's showing how little nanobot-sized robots will be able to be designed with 3D printed magnetic ink and be able to traverse inside your body, guided by physicians. So right now they're not nanobot size, but eventually they'll be really teeny tiny. And they're 3D printed, so they can be any shape that you need them to be. And the way that they're designing them is so that they can move about and do things like even grasp pills, or eventually grasp, maybe even particles or molecules in your body when they're little nanobot size. Now, there are lots of ethical issues when it comes to artificial intelligence, and Helen touched on some of them. Let me raise a couple more. I think everybody has heard of driverless cars, am I right? Yeah. Well, guess what? They're coming out, as a feature on just about every model car you can think of in the 2020 or 2021 timeframe. So if you buy a car next year or the year after, your car is likely to have autonomous mode capabilities. Now, There are a lot of ethical issues that come with driverless cars. So for instance, what if there's an unavoidable accident? Who gets hurt and who makes that decision? So let's say you've got an autonomous car and maybe you don't even have a steering wheel or brake pad, so there's nothing that you as the quote human driver can do, and a pedestrian walks in front of you. Does the car take you and whoever else is in the car with you into a brick wall or into head-coming traffic, or does it run over the person who stepped out in front of you? Is there a different decision if it's a teenage kid who's been buried in their phone doing this, or maybe a mom who's had a pram that slipped out of her hands and is rolled down a ramp? Does the decision change if it's one person in the car or if it's a car with a whole family, including an infant? Who makes those decisions? Who's going to program that into a car? That's one ethical issue. Another issue is bias in databases. And you know how I talked about deep learning? You need really big databases to be able to teach these AIs how to do things. Well, unfortunately, buried in these databases are the same biases that we humans have. So it may be a bias that's contained in text or in voice or in video. It may be racist, it may be gender-based, or age-based or anything else, but the AI may pick up on those biases, and unless you have a human in the loop to prevent those biases from being propagated, then guess what? You've got some ethical issues there. Or what if someone is made redundant because a job task is automated or a robot is used instead of a person? What happens to that person? But then there's also other issues like unintended consequences. So let's say with all good intentions in mind, an AI researcher says, I want to design an AI that will completely obliterate breast cancer in women specifically, because women are the primary, I suppose, people who are impacted by breast cancer, although I understand that on rare occasions, breast cancer can also occur in men. But let's just say that this AI comes up with a conclusion that the best way to get rid of breast cancer is to get rid of women. Well, let's hope you haven't hooked it up to an autonomous lethal weapon system, or you'd obliterate half the planet. You certainly would get rid of breast cancer, but I think that's what you would call an unintended consequence. There are other issues as well. For instance, at some point in the future, when robots and AIs get really intelligent, will they need rights too? Will they ever gain sentience? What happens to the haves and the have-nots? There are so many ethical issues associated with AI. We could talk about it for a really long time. But let me just share with you where I think AI is going, and that is it's going to get smarter and smarter. So right now, if you look at AI in general, you'll see AIs that are designed for really specific things like detecting breast cancer or detecting lung cancer or detecting a particular pattern or being a chatbot or anything that you can imagine, but they're very narrow AIs. When will they reach human general level intelligence where they're able to multitask and do different things like us humans can? Well, if you ask AI researchers, and this question was actually put to a conference about 2 years ago, full of AI researchers, back in 2017, the conclusion of the audience was that it's very likely that AIs will reach human level intellect by 2030 to 2040. Half of the AI researchers thought that that was a very good probability. If you go out to the year 2075, 90% of the researchers thought it was a good probability. I think it may happen even sooner because of some recent developments that have been happening in the world of quantum computing. A couple of months ago at Google, they've had a quantum computing /AI lab, and they've discovered something called Nevin's law. So many of you might have heard of Moore's law, where technology doubles in capability every 18 months or so. Well, with Nevin's law, what they found was that quantum computing was doubling every 9 months or so in terms of its capabilities. At the beginning of the year, they were able to replicate things on typical laptops that they'd have around the lab, emulating a quantum computer. But a couple of months later, like 2 months after some of the initial experiments, they were not able to find any normal computers that could replicate the results of the quantum computers. They had to go to supercomputers. And they're estimating that by the end of this year, in 2019, that they may not even be able to replicate the sort of QC results with regular supercomputers. Now, if you match up that kind of level of processing power with the rapid increases that are going like this with AI development, it's very possible that we'll start to see what we call general machine intelligence a lot earlier than many people would have even predicted just a few years ago. I think the jury is still out, but if you ask me to put a ceiling on how smart AI could get, I would say I'm not going to put a ceiling on it because I think it could end up actually being a lot smarter than us humans at some stage. And then what happens to us? Well, the good news is that I do see a future for us, and we may not have to turn into cyborgs. But there is a very good possibility that we will be taking technologies of some description into our bodies and augmenting ourselves in different ways because we want to and not for medical purposes. One of the very first things that I think many people may end up doing is using something called a smart contact. And these have been under development by a number of companies for at least the past 5 or 6 years or more. So what we're looking at are contact lenses that combine all kinds of ICT functions like you would find on your smartphone, facial recognition, plus biotech. So already, Google, Sony, and Samsung have patents where if you blink, you can start taking a picture or a video. The big picture up here is a Google prototype from 2014, and you can see that there are a lot of opaque bits. The smaller picture is also from Google, but in 2017, and you can see that there are a lot less opaque bits. By the time something like this comes to market, it's likely to be completely transparent, like a contact lens is today, and made out of a material called graphene that is super flexible, but harder than diamonds, and a great conductor of electricity. Now, that's all cool, but when you add in the biotech stuff, it gets really interesting, and that's where I see people will adopt it. So imagine if you had contact lenses that could not only give you augmented reality glasses type of features, but also give you autofocus. Say goodbye to reading glasses. I'll be very happy to ditch mine. Or give you telephoto vision or infrared vision, or be able to detect your ocular pressure and pre-glaucoma conditions, or potentially even do drug delivery directly through the contact lens, or be able to detect your insulin level through a chemical called lacroglobin. No more pinpricks to see what your insulin levels are. Your glasses will tell you it's time to top up on something. This is the promise, but what has happened, and I've been watching this for a long time, ever since I first started tracking it, they keep saying 5 to 7 years, and then it moves out, 5 to 7 years, and another 5 to 7 years. And apparently the challenges are more on the pharmaceutical and biotech side than the ICT side. You've got to have the lenses that are comfortable, and they're running also into some challenges with drug delivery and medical condition detection. But I think at some stage we'll start to see these become commercialized, and when we do, then you'll have app stores like you do for your smartphones, where you'll be able to download apps for your smart contacts that may be like your smartphone apps, but also maybe medical apps as well to give you telephoto vision or be able to detect different kinds of medical conditions. But it will go further than that. That's just the first step. Next step is going to be little tiny brain-machine interfaces that we take into our body. I'm going to show you a little film clip from UC Berkeley of an experimental prototype of neural nanodust that they're working on. It's millimeter size right now, but it will go down to nanometer size eventually. It's being funded as part of a research grant from DARPA, and DARPA has given grants to a number of different organizations because they're looking very heavily at brain-machine interfaces. So this is the size that it is now, and it uses wireless technology, but ultrasound, not radio frequency, to be able to do in-body telemetry. And right now they're testing on rats, not humans. But eventually, it will probably go into human testing. So if you can imagine that you had sort of disability and you needed to control a wheelchair or an exoskeleton, imagine having a little chip or bot floating around inside of you, and all you have to do is think and, you move. That's the promise of this type of technology. Simply by detecting the electrical currents in your brain and your intent to do something. So example would be moving prosthetics. And once it gets down to nanometer size, we're talking much, much tinier than a grain of sand. And these little nanobots may be floating all through your body, doing real-time in-body telemetry and checking your organs in real time, detecting the very first signs of cancer or any other illness in your body before it actually takes root. That would be pretty cool. But on the other hand, what if these interfaces are owned by your employer? Okay, who owns that interface? And instead of being used to eliminate pain, what if a hacker got a hold of the interface and used it to induce pain and caused you to do something that you wouldn't normally do? So once again, we start getting into these whole ethical issue areas. Another thread that is starting to become very widespread in the technology community is, should we merge our human brains with AI to be able to basically hold off the robots and keep pace with all the smart AI that's coming down the pike? And there are a lot of people, especially in the futurist community, that think it's inevitable and that that's something that we should do. In fact, I have very mixed emotions about that. I think that if someone has a medical issue, like let's say you're paralyzed, having a brain-machine interface can be a wonderful thing if it allows you to move again. But on the other hand, if I've got an AI sublayer sitting in my brain and it does something stupid like the autocomplete on my smartphone when I'm sending a text and sends off a stupid message that happens to come out of my mouth instead of a text, then what? But on the other hand, it could give me superpowers. Can you imagine having a question that you think and being connected to the World Wide Web, whatever it is in the 2030s, and immediately getting the answer to a super complex question, or having the ability to tap into supercomputer-like capabilities? Or imagine, if you will, like Trinity in the Matrix, you needed to learn how to fly a helicopter and you just downloaded the ability on how to fly a copter. It raises all kinds of interesting issues, but there are real developments happening. In fact, in June this year, Elon Musk, through his company called Neuralink, came out with the first of his chips for brain-machine interfaces that he's calling an N1. It's 4 millimeter by 4 millimeter, so it's like about the 10th as thick as one of your hairs. And they're looking at implanting 4 of these teeny-weeny little chips in patients by the end of next year, people who have paralysis, to help them regain their motor sensory skills. But ultimately, the idea is that these kinds of brain-machine interfaces would be used by healthy people to give them augmented capabilities. And once again, you get into all these ethical issues and who's responsible if your body does something because the AI made your body do it, and you've just had this random thought pass through your head, but it wasn't something that you were ever going to act on, but the AI couldn't distinguish between the random thought and the real thought. So an example, make it concrete. Let's say you're in traffic and somebody cuts you off and you have this momentary thought of, oh, somebody should ram that, whatever, you know, in the back of their car to teach them a lesson. You wouldn't actually go ahead and do it, but what if the AI picked up on it and did it? Would you be responsible or would the AI be responsible? You know, these are really serious issues that we need to think about. And do we actually want to become cyborgs and part machine? It's a serious issue. But I do believe that one of the new jobs of the future will be human implant specialists. So today we do have implant specialists in the medical community for medical devices like pacemakers and insulin pumps. But I'm talking about new jobs that involve people who are looking at implants that are used for non-medical purposes and help you fine-tune, control them, and maybe even take them out if you don't like them. Another area of major discovery and excitement is genetic engineering. How many of you have heard of the Human Genome Project? A few of you, right? So we're looking to sequence the roughly 3 billion genomes in our body. It's been predicted that by 2025, only 6 years from now, we'll have sequenced between 100 million and 2 billion of the genes in our bodies. And once we do that, we'll be able to pick up all kinds of genetic markers that might indicate a predisposition for disease. We'll be able to design medications that are targeted to our particular body's DNA. We'll be able to design and maybe even 3D print drugs that are targeted exactly at our genetic makeup. And with the help of nanobots too, be able to really target very precise medical conditions. So one of the things that I think we will also start to see is a new job category of genetic 3D designers. And they'll not only be doing things for medical purposes, but they'll be looking at the human cosmetic and creative potential as well. So already there are people who alter their appearance through surgery, not just for plastic surgery to look younger, but to actually have new appendages and to give them different sensory perceptions. I think that we're going to see a whole new class of people that specialize in genetic tampering and changing a real living human body and maybe making us look like that with strange ear-type appendages. But one of the things that I think is going to drive it is outer space exploration. So what's happening in outer space is that within the last couple of years, we've designed reusable rockets, and that's a game changer. So just like airplanes today are reusable, rocket ships, instead of being one-off up into the sky and you've lost $1 billion, they're now being designed by private entrepreneurs to be able to fly up into outer space and come back down again. I think within the next 10 years, we're going to move into the world of space exploration. And as we do, we'll start to see all kinds of jobs that are involved there, and people will probably alter their physiology to be able to survive better in outer space. We might also see people who change their anatomy to be able to live underwater or in all kinds of different conditions that our human bodies today cannot be doing. So look out for this. We're probably on a 20-year, maybe even 30-year horizon, but it's something that your kids or your grandkids may actually end up doing as a job of the future. There are all kinds of genetic experiments taking place, including one that when I first read about it, I thought this has got to be a joke, because I read about it in early April. I thought somebody's having an April Fool's joke, right? And it was about a study that was done in China where they were introducing human brain genes, MCHP1, I think it was called, which is a brain development gene from a human, into macaque monkeys to make them smarter. I thought, oh, for sure, this has got to be a joke. But I actually found the actual study published in a Beijing scientific peer-reviewed journal, and they really are doing this. And what they did was they took human genomes and they injected them into monkey embryos. There were 11 of them that they tried. 6 of them died, 5 of them survived. And what they found with the 5 that survived was that their short-term memory was better than a typical monkey, and that their brain development period lasted longer than a typical monkey, which is more similar to a human. And these same researchers are looking to introduce yet another gene, which I think is called FOXP, which is also related to language capabilities, and introducing these into monkeys. Now, they used monkeys for a particular reason rather than apes, in that they said, well, monkeys, we branched off from monkeys about 25 million years ago, whereas apes, it was much closer, and we share about 98% of the DNA. But how many of you have seen any of the movies Planet of the Apes? Didn't end so well for us humans, did it? You know, and that raises the question, just because we can do something, does that mean that we should do it? And I think when it comes to these sorts of experiments, you know, you're starting to look at an ethical line here that maybe we shouldn't cross. You know, do we really need ultra smart monkeys? I don't know. I really don't. There are other incredible innovations that are happening right now, some of which involve stem cells. This is a neurosurgeon named Chris Duma. He's based out of California, and he's been working with Alzheimer patients. And what he's done is he's taken stem cells that are from people's autologous fat, so basically your excess love handles, they give you a little mini liposuction. They take it out, put it in a centrifuge, spin out the fat, and separate out the stem cells. And then what he's done is he's been working with people with Alzheimer's. He's drilled a hole in their brain and has injected them with their own stem cells. He started with one patient, this guy named Jack Sage, who was 82, who had fairly severe Alzheimer's. And what happened with Jack after the course of 8 treatments, now mind you, this is experimental and Jack paid for this by himself, no insurance coverage, is that when they first started out, his memory scores were very, very low. I think it was something like 24 on the memory percentile, but after 8 treatments, it went up to 48% on the memory score percentile, and his hippocampus actually grew as well. But more importantly, after 8 treatments, there were no ill effects, and his memory was actually increasing. He was able to remember things from his early work career. He had been forgetting the names of his kids and was starting to remember the names of his family and all kinds of details that had been lost to him for many years. There were 19 patients all up in this trial, no adverse effects that I've been able to find out. And the first stage of the trial was all just about safety and making sure that there were no ill effects. But when it comes to stem cells, it still really is hit or miss. You know, there are a lot of really potential great uses, but I think there's still a lot that we have to learn about how stem cells work in human bodies. But I think that there's going to be a whole lot of new jobs of the future that have to do with regenerative medical technology specialists, people who design protocols, people who are able to help out in the labs, people who are doing all sorts of things regarding regeneration using stem cells or genetic engineering. We're also going to see a lot happening in the area of nanobots. So this is just a pretty cool graphic picture. It's not the actual nanobot that I'll be describing in a moment. There's a nanobot that has been designed through a collaboration between one of the Chinese universities, I think it's the National Institute of Technology in Arizona State University, where they are designing nanobots in a clinical trial that are based on DNA, and they're being used to fight cancer. So what they're doing is 3D printing rolls of DNA, and they're coating it with a protein that is able to detect certain kinds of cancers and bind with those cancer cells and then literally starve them of blood. And in early trials with mice, it's starting to prove effective. Eventually, we might see little nanobot type of robots that are designed with our own DNA that are able to be injected into our bloodstream that will attack very specific types of cancers because they'll be coated with a protein that binds with that specific cancer, and it will literally starve the blood supply for that cell and shrink the tumor and eventually kill the cancer tumor. That would be pretty cool, wouldn't it? There's also a lot of work being done with new immunotherapy techniques. CAR-T is one of them that is already being trialed in humans, and CAR-T stands for chimeric antigen receptor therapy. And there are a lot of pharmaceutical companies that are working in this area. Now, right now, CAR-T is only being used for two very specific types of blood cancers, leukemia and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and only with patients who meet very narrow criteria, typically, end of life, no chance of survival, because once you put these in your body, they're there for life. So what they do is they take out your T cells, which are white blood cells, and then they genetically engineer them with a cancer-killing agent, and then they re-inject them into your body, and it goes to work killing these two specific types of cancers. But there have been some very serious side effects, everything from high fevers and feeling sick to dying. So you've got to be very careful, at least at this stage of development, in who you give these treatments to. But we're still in the very early stages, and as you can imagine with any other medication or new trial, things get better the more you try and the more experiments you do and the larger the population you have, and especially when you combine it with the power of AI and being able to predict things and look at what might happen in mass populations, you can see where this kind of treatment could grow to be much larger and be used for other types of cancers as well. But it's a new and exciting area, and eventually they might have something like this that is used for breast cancer as well. So one of the other new jobs I think we'll see are nanomedics, because as we start putting these little nanobots into our body, we're going to need people that are able to guide them to the right parts of our body where they need to be. We're going to need people that might be able to help get them out of our body if something's going wrong, redirect them if we decide that we want things to work a little bit differently in our own bodies, especially with genetic engineering. Maybe we've changed our looks to work, in outer space and we want to come back down to Earth, Lots and lots of kind of strange and wonderful new jobs will be out there. And what about reversing aging? Is there anybody in this room would like to be a little bit younger? Have your wisdom from today, but maybe look and feel younger? I'll raise my hand, right? At the Salk Institute, they've been working on exactly that, reversing aging from a genetic perspective. And they've already done experiments with both mice and human cells in petri dishes in vivo, where they've been able to reverse aging. And in several live mice, one mouse had progeria, a rapid aging disease, and they were able to reverse the clock on this rapidly aging mouse, and then on another mouse as well who didn't have a disease, but they also were able to start turning back the clock on this middle-aged mouse. And the idea is that over the course of time, they think that they're going to be able to develop therapies for even centenarians to be able to turn back the clock and literally make your body look and feel younger, but retain all the wisdom and knowledge that you have. But it gets even better than that. There's a physicist named Professor Yanir Bar-Yam who believes that aging is going to be controlled by one single gene, and once we find it, we'll be able to turn the off switch on. And when we do, the average lifespan will be between 400 and 800 years old. Can you imagine working for 400 years? Can you imagine being married for 800 years to the same person? All of this is on the horizon. It sounds like science fiction, but it's a possibility. And there's work being done on it by serious scientists. What kind of a fun world are we going to live in? We're going to have lots of new jobs of the future. You know, one of them that I think is going to be very relevant to your industry is what I'm calling an AI continuing education specialist, because there are so many advances in the world of AI that impact healthcare that I think almost any healthcare organization, whether it be BreastScreen or others, are going to have people whose task it is to stay abreast of all the latest developments in AI, specifically, in this case, relating to healthcare. And that he, she, them will be your go-to team for all kinds of information about artificial intelligence. We're also going to need AI trainers. You know, we've talked about a lot of examples where things might go wrong with AI, and there's a really funny example that came out of the OpenAI lab where they were training an AI to do video boat racing, and you know, it's a game called Coast Runner. So the idea is that you want to cross the finish line with the most points possible, and you get points with these green pop-up widgets. And to get a widget, you run over it and you get a point. Well, the AI got competitive and super obsessed on winning points and never bothered to finish the finish line. And it was just going around in circles. It was crashing into other boats and doing everything except what it needed to do. And part of that led the researchers to believe that reinforcement learning from humans in every kind of AI development is going to be essential to grooming AIs that are congruent with our own human values. And it's going to keep changing because the data sets that we feed these AIs are constantly changing, and we're going to need humans in the loop for reinforcement learning for the foreseeable future. Another thing that us humans are going to have to do with AIs is teach them about human emotion. So we've got AIs that can look at our facial gestures and say, oh, happy, sad, or listen to the tone of our voice and make judgments, but they don't actually understand what that means. And we'll start to see AI companies hiring people like poets and philosophers and political scientists and playwrights and others to help AIs start to better understand the emotional impact of some of what their processing actually means in the world of humans. We're also going to see humans training robots. There's a company called Kindred AI, which has designed a robot that literally learns from humans by imitation learning. So humans are in virtual reality suits with controllers, much like the movie Avatar, and telepresence, and they're showing these robots how to do things by controlling them in virtual reality. So this robot is used in a warehouse, and what they're doing with this virtual reality human pilot is teaching the robot the difference in how do you pick up a piece of clothing versus how do you pick up a fragile vase versus a big bulky package. But you can imagine how many industries where we'll see robots deployed. There's going to be no end of training that's required, and it's a new job category for people. In the world of human resources, I think we'll still have HR, but the title will change to Head of Human and Robot Orchestration, and that will involve deciding where do you use a human, where do you use a piece of AI software, where do you use a physical robot, and how do you get them to best work together as a collaborative team? And at the same time, how do you design your organization to be agile enough to take into account all this big data that's coming in and changing fast, not doing business cases that last 6 months or a year, but literally business cases that might last for a couple of days and making a decision and boom, go, do it. Another super important job of the future that I think is going to be a C-suite position is a chief ethics officer. And you've heard quite a bit about AI and ethics, and I just think that this is going to be one of those positions that is going to become increasingly important. And I've talked about this for quite a while now, and people are starting to call this the other CEO. And the idea is being picked up by a lot of different people that this is going to be a really important job of the future. But last but not least, I do not see the human touch ever going away, especially when we talk about healthcare. It's so important to have human empathy. Even if we have robots and AIs that can mimic empathy, it's not the same thing as getting your hand held by somebody when you're told that you've got breast cancer or that some other disease is on your horizon, or you need physical therapy, or you're lonely and you just want to get a hug. You know, the human touch is just part of our existence as human beings. And I think your jobs are really important. And I don't see that, especially in radiography, you know, where you're working with people, and especially women, you know, in a situation where it might hurt a little bit and they're a little bit nervous and they're afraid of the outcome. I don't think us women want a robot to be doing a mammogram for us. I think they actually want a real live person, and that's not going to change. So with that, I'd like to now open the floor up to some discussion. And there are 3 areas, and we're going to have some roving mics that I'd like you to think about. And it doesn't have to be just my presentation. It can be some other things that you've heard throughout the day. So, and they don't have to be in this specific order. So the 3 things are, what are your thoughts on the use of AI in radiology? What are your thoughts on robots and breast surgeries? And what do you see as important new jobs of the future? And if you feel like you need to take a comfort break, please feel free to get up, do what you have to, and come on back. So who wants to go first? This is the sharing part of the exercise. If you wouldn't mind saying your name for the audience, that would be great.
Hi, my name's Diana. I was just wondering, do you think AI will mean that radiologists will lose some of their skills? Do you think that they won't, because they'll rely on AI more, do you think the radiologists will become less skilled?
I actually think they're going to need to be more skilled, because the AI, I think, will eliminate, you know, or help out with a lot of the image comparison, but then ultimately it will be a radiologist, a human, that needs to decide whether that really looks like cancer or really looks like a false positive. And when you've got an AI saying one thing, you need to be on the top of your game to be able to say, no, I disagree with that, and here's why. Some other thoughts or questions? Oh, okay. Wait, we'll go over here and then we'll go over here. So over here first.
So my name's Lucy.
Hi, Lucy.
I must admit, I just have concerns about, I mean, there is people in the world who, have difficulties learning. So I guess I worry about what's going to happen to all those people in the world in the future.
You're talking about what happens to an unskilled labour force that can't cope
Basically,
with change.
yeah. And some people, we know some people don't have the learning capacity of other people.
Yeah, you're right. And, you know, there will be a lot of new jobs, and there'll also be some jobs for unskilled labour as well, but less so for people who are not willing to retrain in other areas. So if someone's got some sort of mental disability that prevents them from learning, I think they're probably already challenged today, and that's not going to get much easier in the future. But let's say you've got someone that is maybe a truck driver today, and in 20 years' time, trucks are completely autonomous. And by the way, I think trucks ought to be the last kind of vehicle that are autonomous, especially when you're driving with heavy loads on icy conditions and so on. But let's just use that as an example. That same person may very well be the kind of person who trains the autonomous truck on how to handle the icy road, or how to, handle different packages. They may be the virtual reality robot controllers where they know how to do different physical things, but they're actually controlling robots through telepresence and virtual reality, which wouldn't require as much skill as, say, somebody who's a nanomedic specialist. You'd have to know how to work alongside of AI, but you wouldn't necessarily have to be an AI expert. And there'll be other things like smart home handy person. So you've got all these gadgets, and then what do you do when suddenly you can't get into your house because your smart lock stops working? Who do you call? Yes, you would have to be trained on that specific thing, but it's no different than, calling for roadside assistance when your car breaks down. You need a certain level of skill and mechanics and to be able to get the car started again, but you don't have to be a car designer to be able to do that.
Okay.
But we will have to look after people, especially if companies take a view, which I don't agree with, that if we introduce automation, we fire people. My view is that if a company introduces some aspect of automation into their organization, they ought to be looking at the parts of a job that are repetitive and boring and that people don't want to do, and that free people up to do more valuable, interesting things and retain them in the company or reskill them, not fire them. Because if we take a view as a society that everything that we automate, we just fire people, guess what? There's nobody left to buy your products either. And then we're talking about things like basic living wages and robot taxes and all these other things that I think are economically unsustainable. And we're creating a dystopian world. And I really don't want to see that. Okay, next we had another comment over here.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Wendy.
Wendy, did you say?
Wendy, yes.
Hi.
Hi. I'm just worried about, you're talking about robots and breast surgery. Like, is there going to be a group of privileged people who can afford to have their robot doing their surgery? And then there's going to be a whole lot of other people who are getting a secondary service and they're just getting a human surgeon. And then what you've been talking about with all this fabulous technology, as well as a broader picture, you're going to have people who, same sort of thing, who have access to all this. And then you've got people around the world who can't even feed themselves.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And, you don't even have to go into the future to look at inequity in healthcare right now. So if you want to have a really top surgeon operating on you for almost any medical condition, you're going to be paying out of pocket because the top surgeon is going to be costing a lot more than whatever Medicare and the private insurance will cover. That's already there, and I really wish that would go away, but I don't see that going away right now. I do think that the healthcare systems will start to evolve to accommodate robotic surgery sooner rather than later because of economics. Because what happens is that when you have robotic surgery, or at least this is what the early data is saying, is that your stay in the hospital is a lot shorter. And in the cost scheme of things, even though you might be paying initially more for the robot, the fact that you're freeing up beds faster, I think will have a flow-on economic benefit. But right now, I've not seen either the public insurance segment, Medicare, or the private insurance segment have that light bulb switched on yet. So right now, I think it's the people who can afford to have that kind of extra surgery who will benefit from it. But I'm hoping that in the longer term, the light bulb will switch on, that it's actually more cost efficient for us to use these new advanced techniques. Another comment? Okay, over here, please. We're getting you running.
Sorry, it doesn't fit into these three.
That's okay, that's fine.
Okay, I'm just curious. With Jack Sage's study, or his Alzheimer's reversal, did he have personality changes? Did the studies say that?
There's nothing that I read about that. The only personality change that I was able to discern was that he was actually remembering things and recognizing family members. So from a personality change perspective, it was like the old Jack was back, and the forgetful Jack was becoming less the dominant personality. So it was actually a good personality change. It was actually the real Jack rather than the Jack that had the Alzheimer's and was forgetting everything. I have not been able to find anything in the literature on this study about what happened to any of the other patients. The only one that I've been able to find detailed information about was Jack, who was the first patient.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? We can go really wide on healthcare or anything else you heard today, because this is not just questions from me, but it's comments, and discussion amongst yourselves as well. Oh, another one over here.
Nothing to do with health at all, but with human failings and greed, do you see a place for AI to replace people like Trump and Boris Johnson? And would not the world be? Could we not run the whole world with AI so that it will be a better place, and we can protect the Murray-Darling and the Amazon rainforest, and not destroy the planet, because there won't be a planet for AI to worry about in the not too distant future. In my view, I'm becoming a real cynic, and I mean, this is brilliant, but humans being humans are going to stuff the whole world up in a very short space of time.
Oh gosh, that is such a loaded question. Oh my gosh, I hardly even know where to
you've already
start.
chatted for 2 hours, so maybe it better be next year.
No, okay, I'll try to sort of distill it down a little bit. I see AI and basically all technologies as tools that can be used for good or evil. So think about a knife. You can use a knife to make a beautiful meal in your kitchen, or you can turn around and stab somebody. And the knife isn't good, the knife isn't evil, the metal isn't good or evil, it's what you do with it. The same thing can happen with AI. AI can be used for the benefit of humanity, but in the wrong hands, it can do some pretty dastardly things, especially if it's not taught to recognize human values. So right now, if you think about who's designing AIs, it's typically young men in their 20s, right? We've got a really tiny subset of the population that are designing AIs, and there are very few women in technology, very few still in AI. And would AI create this wonderful utopian world? I'm not so sure that it would, because the way that AI learns is through big data sets. And these big data sets might come from social media, where we know that there's a lot of hate mongers and trolls and all this other stuff. And if the AIs were picking up on all these, sort of hate things, as well as the nice things that people say, it's like a black box inside the AI. Not even the researchers really know what's happening inside these neural networks, and that's why you need this whole reinforcement learning and AI trainer. So I don't personally want to see AIs running the world, because I can see too many areas where things could go dastardly wrong really fast, especially if they had lethal autonomous weapons. In terms of politics, there are people of every political stripe that you could say love them or hate them. I personally am worried about the way that AI is being used in a lot of countries for facial recognition and surveillance state and the loss of privacy. And AI is behind all of that. And without, if AI wasn't in the mix, you wouldn't have things like social credit systems happening and so on. So, good and bad, you've got to weigh it up. But I don't think that AI is at a stage where we'd say, let's trust, the rest of humanity to what I would consider a sort of 2-year-old level mentality technology. I think it's still a baby in diapers.
Let's put the gene you put in the monkeys into the politicians.
Well, there's one other funny thing I can say about politicians, is that one of the things that AI is good at, much better than humans, is actually reading facial emotions. can you imagine if you had augmented reality glasses on and you're watching a political debate and flashing in front of you is an interpretation of what they really are thinking whenever a question is asked? You know? Wouldn't that be fun to actually watch their real reaction instead of whatever it is they're saying, and whether they actually agree with the party line or not, and they're just saying yes, 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 but they're really meaning, no way would I ever do that. That would be fun. Question back here.
I'm Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer.
With all the good and bad, with all the good and bad with AI, is it legislated? Is it?
Not at all.
That's what I was, yeah.
And in fact, I'll tell you something really scary. I've recently been doing talks for like the Law Society and regulators and other conferences where I talk about AI and ethics and something called deep fakes, where basically you've heard of fake news and you've heard of deep learning. It's a montage of those two words. And if you can imagine a video of an actor, but that actor actually looks and sounds like you because somebody's used AI to make it look and sound like you. So imagine a scenario where you're working for a corporation and you get a video call and it looks like it's from your colleague, it sounds like your colleague, the background is their office, and it's through your normal communication channel, but it's been hacked. And it's not really the person you think it is, it's a deep fake. And you inadvertently leak information about a merger or acquisition because you think you're talking to somebody on your team about information that they need to know. And it's social engineering involved as well. They've just come back from a trip to the US. They've called you, asked for an update. You know that they've been overseas. There's nothing there to signal to you that you're not talking to the right person. And by the way, deepfakes are that good right now, but nobody's actually hacked a video stream. But in my scenario, it's actually a hack. And I've asked rooms full of lawyers and legislators, who would you hold responsible for the leaking of that information? Would it be the person who's been tricked and leaked it? Would it be the company that's hosting, the video platform? Would it be the cyber criminal or someone else? In a regulatory conference, everyone that raised their hand, not everyone did, thought that the person who should be prosecuted was the person who was tricked into thinking it was someone else on the line. At the Law Society conference that I spoke at about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we actually did a poll where people voted, and 2/3 of the room thought that it would be the person who accidentally leaked the information because they were tricked, and the other 1/3 thought it was the hacker. Nobody, 0, voted for the company that was hosting the video platform that was hacked, and 0 voted for something else. So that actually really worries me because that says to me that legislators and lawyers aren't thinking about, the future of where this is going and how people may be tricked by hackers and others who use these AI tools in a nefarious manner. And frankly, I think the person who's leaked the information in this hypothetical scenario is actually a victim. If you're looking at a video and it's your normal company channel and it looks like a colleague that you talk to every day and it sounds like them and it's got their office in the background and you knew that they had just come back from a trip, why would you think it's not them? And you're the one who's supposed to go to jail? I'm sorry, but that just doesn't jive with me. So I think I've just got a time's up. So I think we're going to have to end this discussion, even though we could probably talk about these issues for a long time. I hope you've enjoyed this.
Thanks, Shara. So that's the end of our program. Thank you, Shara. That was really thought-provoking, and it's nice to know that when we live to be 800 years old and we're still doing mammograms in 400 years, that we won't be redundant yet. You've got feedback forms on your table, so please give us feedback, because if we have 400 more of these to do, we need lots of new ideas. If you hand them in to Sonia or Cara at the front desk, there's a goodie bag to take home. thank you all for coming. All of you who got up before daylight to come and help, thank you again. And I'd like to give a big hand to the organizing committee, Julie, Vicky, Carrie, and Ruth, who helped put the program together. It was really appreciated. So everybody travel safe, and, you know, have a wonderful rest of the weekend.